Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Great. Super. Now we have a couple of people who have their cameras turned off. And I would invite you to turn them on because we've got some things to talk about today, and I need your help because I don't get stuff. But I want to pose an interesting problem to you today. So invite you to turn on your screens, and we will invite you to unmute so that we can talk about some stuff when we get to that point. So the first thing is to just go over a little bit of what we did last time. We were talking about Heva, which is the fixed service, or going through it as it is, versus Kavanah, which is understanding and knowing what you're doing and doing it with intention. And one theory of Kavanah is that it just means what you intend to do is you intend to fulfill the mitzvah of saying the Shema, for example. And the other version of Kavanah is to really understand what you're doing. So, for example, we had a dispute between some people. Maybe I'll start by putting this back on the screen just to go back over what we were talking about. Okay. So can I share my screen now? Let's see if I can do it.
Be able to.
Oh, here we go. Okay. Let's share the screen. By this time, we should all know how to use Zoom. So many of us are still working on it. Okay. Now, what do you see? Do you see it says Mishnah Berachot 1.1 at the top?
Yes.
Okay, good. Here we go. Here we go. Yes, I got it. Okay. So so we talked about doing, the right time and the right place. And one interesting well, before I waste any more of your time, here it is. This is what I was looking for. Okay, so this is a section from the Talmud, which is a commentary on our Mishnah that we've been reading. The Mishnah says, if one is with keva, the prayer is not supplication. Rabbi Eliezer omer kol ha'oseh tfilato keva. Tfilato, it's not tachanunim, it's not supplication. So the Gemara says, what is keva? It means your prayer feels like a burden. No, the Chachamim say that it means that you're not praying in the language of supplication. You're just praying like by rote, and you're not putting yourself into it. And then the next two, both Rabbah and Rav Yosef, say it means you're unable to introduce a novel element, meaning when you're thinking about what you're saying, you think of something new each time. If you can't do that, then it's keva, and it's not really what it's supposed to be. And then the final comment is, I could introduce a novel element in every prayer, but I'm afraid that I might be confused and lose my place. So there really is a value in doing it the way you're supposed to do it, because you don't get confused and lose your place. And before I continue on, maybe I should stop and let you all ask any questions that you might have about this discussion we had last week. No? Good. Okay. Yeah, please.
Oh, hi. My name's Shoshana.
I got a new computer. It just says user PC, but my name's Shoshana. Thank you. I didn't attend last week, but from what I understand, before prayer, Tefillah was like codified. People used to kind of do their own prayer every morning, and then the rabbis decided that they needed to fix it because people didn't have all day to pray, and people were praying in different parts in different places, and it wasn't cohesive. So either I'm right or wrong about that, but I feel the rabbis, I don't take it wrong in any kind of way or personal in any way, but I think the rabbis were wrong. The rabbis had all day to sit around and daven and burden their souls and do it with kavanah. The rest of the world didn't have time to do that. They had a mitzvah of you go pray, then you go to work, or you go pray and then you do something else. So I think it was kind of an arrogant thing for the rabbis to assume we always have to have kavanah when we pray, because I think we can't.
That's a great point. And it sort of runs counter to what you hear a lot of the time, which is that prayer is really expressing yourself to God. I don't know how to do that. And I actually, I'm not the one thing I'm not sure about is I think the rabbis did recognize that. And we read a little passage last week about, some rabbis think they're better than others, better than regular people at doing this stuff. And in fact, Rabban Gamliel, who was one of the leading guys, said, well, I am more serious about this than you. The general rule is if you were a bridegroom, you don't have to do the Amidah the week of you don't have to do even the Shema the week that you got married, because you're going to be too distracted. And Rabban Gamliel says, I'm going to do it because I'm not going to set aside my connection to God even for a moment. So I think that there is a little bit of a recognition of that sometimes. And in fact, here's a little passage that we looked at from, this is the second one down. So Rabban Gamliel says, every day you must pray the full 18 blessings. And Rabbi Yehoshua, who's always more tolerant and liberal, says, it's okay if you do an abbreviated 18. And Rabbi Akiva takes the middle position and says, if you know what you're doing and can pray fluently, don't cut corners, do the full thing. But if not, it's okay if you do the abbreviated version. Sarah, yeah.
I can't remember which rabbi it was, but it was someone that Rabban Gamliel came to visit for some dispute. And he walked into the rabbi's house, he'd never been there before, and he noticed the walls were all covered with soot. Because this rabbi was a blacksmith, he actually had to work very hard every day. So there were lots of rabbis who did actually work very difficult manually labor jobs. But just the larger question, I mean, mindfulness is all the buzzword right now, right? And it's impossible to have all the time. It's just like humanly impossible. So it's just attention. It's part of the human condition, I think.
Well, I think that's a good point. And in fact, it was Rabbi Yehoshua, who you have here saying, the abbreviated 18 is okay. So that dispute actually came out right here. Yeah, Jerry.
Well, talking about rabbis working, my understanding is in those days, rabbis did work, even up to the time of Rashi. Rashi was a wine grower. So nowadays, rabbis are professional rabbis. But in those days, they all had some occupation, and I don't know how they found the time to do all the rabbinical work they did.
Right, and Maimonides, for example, was a medical doctor, and also he was the advisor to various rulers. So he was really, I don't know how people do this, but they do it, sort of like Dr. Fauci, right? So we read a lot of things about if you're traveling, if you are riding a donkey, you should dismount if you really want to pray from a donkey. It's a little hard to focus on that, but it also is about focusing in terms of thinking about facing Yerushalayim, because part of doing the standing prayer, the Amidah, is standing and looking in the direction of the Holy of Holies, because that's what we're focused on, and because these the Amidah is a replacement for the old sacrifices in the original temple. And we're going to talk about that a little bit this time. Here's another Mishnah that says you should stand and begin to pray only in a reverent state of mind. I don't think it necessarily means you have to have the full-blown mindfulness going on, but at least you gotta be taking it seriously. You gotta try. Don't just say it by rote. Do what you can to put yourself into it, I think is the idea here. So before we leave this topic, I want to show you a little bit of the Talmud that actually is a comment on this. This is the story that Sarah mentioned. We looked at this last time. And by the way, I'm going to put put links to these handouts into the chat, and then Jerry's going to put them up on the website, I think. So this will be available to you. So we had Rabban Gamliel in this conflict with Yehoshua, and Rabban Gamliel is kind of a tough guy. He doesn't really know what's going on. He's rich. He doesn't realize how poor Yehoshua is. It's an interesting story. I want to get to another interesting dispute here, and this is Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, who is who actually put the Mishnah together. But he's also very honest, because he records some places where he took one position and everybody else took the opposite position. So even though he was the head of the Sanhedrin, he put the Mishnahs together. He's probably the most illustrious of all of these guys. He also says, well, in this case, I took this position, and the majority, the sages, as this translation says it, or the chachamim, the wise ones, meaning the majority of the participants, came out the other way. So we'll start out with a basic principle, which this is actually from Megillah. And the reason it's from Megillah is that a lot of times the Mishnah is stream of consciousness, not quite James Joyce, but they'll be talking about one thing and then they'll say, oh yeah, there's another thing that's similar to this. So we're talking about the Megillah for Purim. And it says, one who reads the Megillah out of order has not fulfilled the obligation. And one who reads it by heart rather than from the scroll, or in a translation or in a language other than Hebrew, has not fulfilled the obligation. But they may read it to those who do not understand Hebrew in a language other than Hebrew. This sort of seems to me like the source we read before, where if you know what you're doing, then you better read it from the scroll and you better do it right. But if you are trying to teach this to people who don't know Hebrew, then it's okay not to do it in Hebrew. But also, if you don't understand Hebrew and you heard it in Hebrew, you fulfill your obligation. So in this case, it's okay, it seems to be, not to understand it. Now we're talking about the Megillah, but the very next line, now we're going to the Gemara, which is commenting on this Megillah. A Tana stated, the same rule applies to Hallel, the recital of the Shema, and the Amidah. The rule being what? The rule being, well, there's a difference between the sages and Rabbi Yehuda of what the rule is. Rabbi Yehuda says, and I'm going to call him Rebbe, because he's not just a rabbi, he's the Rebbe, they call him that. So and by the way, can you read this, the screen, or should I make it a little bigger? See if that helps at all. So first there's a discussion of the Shema, and Shoshana, to your point, the Shema was always thought of as 3 specified paragraphs, and that's because it comes from the Bible, and the Torah says, you know, these words which I command you this day shall be upon your heart, and you shall repeat them and recite and teach them to your children, and so on. So there's a specific explicit direction that you should read this. And we talked about, I don't remember if it was the first class or the last class, that reading it doesn't just mean reading it, it means reciting it in the right state of mind. So if you're just reading along in Deuteronomy and you come across this section, it might count as saying the Shema if you're saying it with the intention of saying the Shema. But if you just sort of are reading, maybe not quite enough. But the Bible tells you read it, recite it. And Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi says, you have to recite it as it is written. When it says recite it, it means recite it. And the Chachamim say any language is okay. So I'm bringing this because it's an example of the keva, which is the fixed text, versus the kavanah, which is understanding what you're doing and doing it with meaning, doing it with mindfulness, if you want. And the sages are taking a more liberal position, I think, because they're saying, well, I don't know, maybe I'll throw this out to you, is going back to the idea from Megillah where they say any language is okay, and then, or it has to be the Hebrew language. Who's being stricter? The sages maybe are saying you have to have kavanah. Whether or not you follow the keva, we don't care. Whether you read it in the actual Hebrew or some other language, okay. But you have to have kavanah. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi is saying the opposite. He's saying it doesn't matter if you understand it or not. You know, do your best. If you don't understand it, it's okay if somebody reads it to you in the language you understand, but you are fulfilling your obligation to hear the Megillah either way, if you understand it or if you don't understand it. So I guess, I don't know if you could say one is more permissive and the other is more strict or rigid. They're just permissive or strict about different things. Does that make sense? Any comment on that thought? Yeah.
All right. First, what Megillah are they referring to? Is it Esther and Ruth? Those Megillot?
It's Esther.
Oh, it's Esther. Okay,
yeah.
So at that point, the rabbis must have known that there were a lot of Jews living in Babylonia, Bavel, and they spoke a different language. So it would only be fair if the mitzvah is on us to hear it and understand it. We, of course, would have to recite it, hear it in the language we understood. The other thing is that I think there were a lot of people who are illiterate in Hebrew, i.e., especially a lot of women, and the mitzvah is on women to hear the Megillah.
That's right. And actually, during the time of the rabbis, we're living in Roman-occupied Palestine, land of Israel, and so there were probably a lot of Jews who only spoke Greek. And there was a Jewish community in Egypt, and they probably didn't speak Hebrew. They probably spoke Greek, and of course, Aramaic was the commonly spoken language. So yeah, we're not the only community where maybe a majority of American Jews don't speak Hebrew. So now what is happening here is they are taking the rule from the Megillah, which was what this was about, and extending it. And this Tana is saying not just the Megillah, it's also Hallel, it's the Shema, and it's the Amidah. So I want to take you through the rationale for the Shema, and then we'll go to the Amidah, which is the difference between them is kind of interesting. So what we're doing here is we are contrasting, how did you get to this rule? They say, what? How do you get to that? Why are you saying, Rebbe, why are you saying it has to be written in Hebrew? And Chachamim, why in any language? So we're gonna take that language from the first paragraph of the Shema, V'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavcha hayom al levavecha. And it shall be that these words that I command you this day shall be on your heart. And actually, levavecha your heart in that period of time was the seat of your intelligence. So we might say these words should be on your mind. You should be thinking about them. So Rebbe says, well, the hayu, these words are to be of your heart, are to be the hayu. It means the words that are to be. We're not talking about some other words. We're talking about these words are to be on your heart. So that means these words are to be means in Hebrew, the hayu. So the Chachamim say, what biblical source did they rely on? They rely on Shema Yisrael, hear, O Israel. So hear means listen, and it means understand. How can you hear it? How can you really take it in if you don't understand what you're saying? So therefore, it's okay to do it in some other language if you don't understand it in Hebrew. Different sources from the same paragraph. And this is part of the reason I'm bringing this is for the substance of it, but part of it is for understanding the way they play back and forth. It's like a little bit of a game of ping pong. And they're having a little fun with this. They're looking at each other and they say, oh yeah, how do you get this idea? And then somebody's going to come back and challenge that. So here are the sages and Rebbe challenging each other. And the reason that I did these indentations is because we've got the first two ideas, you've got the contrast between Vahayu and Shema. So if Rebbe doesn't agree that Shema Yisrael means hear, O Israel, like listen, what does he think Shema means? What is that word doing there if it doesn't mean what the Chachamim say? So he says, when you're saying the Shema, you should hear what you're saying. Don't whisper, don't just read it to yourself. You should hear, O Israel. And that was one of the Mishnayot that we looked at last time. If you don't say it so that you can hear it, now again, this is elevating keva. You have to do it the way it's prescribed. What's the difference if you're just thinking it and you don't hear it? Well, it is a difference because that's the way you're supposed to do it, right? So the sages agree with that conclusion. So how did they interpret Vahayu? Because Rebbe says Vahayu means it has to be in Hebrew, and they don't agree with that. So what do they think Vahayu means? They say Vahayu means you have to read it as they are in the correct order, not backwards. So they're saying it could be in a foreign language, but you can't do it out of order. You can't mix up the sentences. And everyone agrees with that. Rabbi Yehuda agrees with that too. So they all agree with that, but he has a different approach for the Hayu. So he agrees with the decision, but he doesn't want to use Vahayu for that because he thinks Vahayu means it has to be in Hebrew, and the sages don't agree. So if he doesn't agree with their interpretation of Vahayu, which means it has to be in the correct order, how does he get to the same conclusion that it has to be in the correct order? You see the ping pong going on here? He agrees with the outcome, but he can't rely on Vahayu to get to that point because he's already put a different meaning on Vahayu. He thinks Vahayu means Hebrew. So how does he get to this conclusion that it has to go in the right order? Well, he relies on Hadvarim ha'ela. Vahayu Hadvarim ha'ela. Asher, okay, these words that I command you this day. These words means the words in order, in the correct order, not backwards. So if it just said words, it could be the words in any order, but he looks at these words, which is the prefix ha, the, before dvarim, means in the correct order, not backwards. So now we're going to ping pong back to the Chachamim. Well, if that's what it means, they wouldn't waste their time relying on some other text to get to this. So what did they think Hadvarim means? Because they disagree with Rebbe Yehuda's interpretation. So they say Hadvarim means nothing special. They say, what are you talking about? It's just the letter Hey, it just means these. So it doesn't really get to a satisfying conclusion, although there's more to it, and I asterisk them out, but you can go to Sefaria and get the rest of the story. And by the way, I should give you that website, Sefaria, SEFARIA.org, and it's an amazing source. And it's, you know, I wouldn't know half of this stuff if it weren't for Sefaria. I wouldn't even know most of this stuff. I'm gonna put this in the chat.
David, there is a question. Ira has his hand up.
Oh yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you. It sounds like there's, and I apologize for being late. I had a meeting already late. It sounds like there's a sense of black and white, or either you get it or you don't, in terms of Keva and Kavanagh. Is there any perspective from the rabbis of levels of interpretation? I mean, classically, for example, with you know, the Maimonides' levels of giving, right? There's the different stages, and the best is no one knows you've given to that guy thing. So do we have that approach in terms of the understanding, the better and best?
Absolutely, yes,
Practices?
yes. And one of the texts we looked at here, if I can get back to it, was this text where you've got three different opinions that are expressed, right? Of course, we have, well, here there are three Jews with three opinions. So this is where Rabban Gamliel says, you have to do it in the right way. You have to do the whole Amidah as it's written. And Rabbi Yehoshua says, oh, come on. Do it the short way if that makes it possible for you. Rabbi Akiva says, let's take a middle path and say, well, if you know it well, then say, here it is, 4.3. If you know it well, then you better do what you know. But if it's too hard, then get to the abbreviated version. I think he's saying, well, there's a compromise to be achieved here. And some of these others who say, if you are not in the right state of mind, if you can't get to it, take a night off. If you are traveling to a dangerous place, you don't have to say the whole thing. That might be something that is more important. Although we also had one that said, if you had a seminal emission, then you shouldn't say these words, because you only have to do this in a state of holiness, in a state of purity. Okay, I want to move to another topic. I guess before I do, I should ask if anyone else has comments or questions. Okay, well, I'm going to put up a different, let's see here. Here we go. Okay, so here I am really honestly stuck on what the right answer is. I mean, seriously stuck. So I'm going to throw out some sources here, and I'm really going to invite you to help me figure out what it means. So just to set the stage for it, there are two different kinds of praying. There's praying for what happened in the past, and there's praying what we hope is going to happen in the future. So when we pray about the past, it's kind of thanks, and when we pray for the future, it's petition, it's asking God. Sometimes it's something like forgive us, and sometimes it's praying for health, or praying for the welfare of the community, all kinds of different prayers along those lines. And in fact, some of these sources will say if you are praying for something to happen and it was something that happened in the past, then that is not the way to go. But I'm going to connect all of this to ideas about the world to come and Messiah, and you'll see how I do it. And you tell me if I'm making any sense, because I'm not sure I am. Okay, so I'm going to start with a source that might be familiar. You might have heard this before, and I'm going to see if it is familiar to anyone. So, and I'll read this in Hebrew and then translate. Mazkirin Yetziat Mitzrayim Baleilot. We recall the exodus from Egypt, Yetziat Mitzrayim Baleilot, at night. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, I'll just read in English. Behold, I'm almost a 70-year-old man, and I never understood why the exodus from Egypt should be mentioned at night until Ben Zoma explained it based on the verse. And when he says why, what he's saying is, it goes back to that Talmud passage. We don't know that something is a mitzvah unless we have some kind of a hook from the Bible to hang it on. So everybody agrees that it should be mentioned at night. We think, we'll get back to that in a sec, but Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah doesn't quite understand how do you get that from the Bible. And Ben Zoma says, he says, L'man tiskor et yom tzeitcha me'etz Mitzrayim kol yemei chayecha. So that you should remember the day you came out of Egypt, kol yemei chayecha, all the days of your life. So the days of your life refers to the days, all the days of your life refers to the nights as well. That's Ben Zoma's explanation. But the Chachamim, the majority of the sages, come back and say, the days of your life refers to this world. In Hebrew, Chachamim omrim, the days of your life, ha'olam hazeh, this world. All the days of your life, kol yemei chayecha, to bring it on the days of the Mashiach. So I guess you could ask them, well, then why do you think it should be mentioned at night? But we're not going to go down that path. First of all, where does it come from? Who's seen this before? Yes, Sarah?
I have an unbelievable urge to start boiling pots of water and scrubbing out my fridge.
Yeah. And you better start, because we've only got 3 weeks, right?
I've only got 18 people coming on second night. It's okay. It's fine.
Oh my gosh. Well, so we've all seen this from the Haggadah. And of course, now we know where the Haggadah got it from, because this source came first and the Haggadah took it from this. And of course, the question in Haggadah is, why do we read the Seder at night? Why not during the day of Pesach? And Ben Zoma's answer should be enough, right? Dayenu. So what are we doing with this answer from the sage? Days of your life, all the days of your life includes the days of the Mashiach. Or maybe I'll say Ha'olam hazeh, this world, and Ha'olam haba, the next world. They're saying, in a way, this memory of Egypt, maybe having a Seder, is not going to be gone when we are in the world to come. We have to have this memory, and we have to have thanks to God for what happened in the past, even when we're in the future utopian time that we're, I guess, hoping for. And that's the majority of opinion. And by the way, there is a dispute, because we read about this last time. Again, back to Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yoshua, where somebody asked, is it obligatory to recite the Shema at night? The last paragraph of the Shema. And Rabbi Yehoshua says, no, it's not, because it says, look at your tzitzit, and how can you see it at night? And Rabban Gamliel says, no, it's obligatory, and if you disagree with me, I'm going to humiliate you. So here we're at a point where we're actually the next generation. We know it should be said at night, but how do we know that? And maybe it doesn't need to be said at night. This is about the third paragraph of the Shema as well as the Seder. So I've got Sarah and Shoshana.
So backing up a little about when we're in the world to come, we'll still be remembering the Yetziat Mitzrayim. I agree the text certainly says that, but if you read elsewhere in the Talmud, of course, you'll find an opposing view, and that is that the only text we will need to read in the world to come is actually Megillat Esther. So, confusion reigns.
Right, right. And here, we're probably not really talking about halacha. We're not talking about law. We're talking about midrash agadah, which is basically interpretation in a way to teach a lesson or to tell a story, which how can we say now what the halakha is going to be in the world to come? I think it's a little premature. So Shoshana.
Yeah, isn't the tradition that the line, behold, I am almost a man of 70 years old, that in truth, Rebbe Elazar was a young man, but he was very, very brilliant, and being brilliant and young kind of didn't go together. So he went like gray overnight, so he would look old, and that's why there'd be more respect of him. Number one. Number two, is it too simplistic for me to say the reason you would say it at night is because our holidays start at sunset, so that's when you would start the activities for the holiday?
Okay, both good questions. Now, for the first one, again, this goes back to that story that we read about Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yehoshua. It's a fantastic story. And the part that we didn't read is, remember that they deposed Rabban Gamliel, and they said, he's so mean to Rabbi Yehoshua, how long do we have to put up with this? And they kicked him out of being the head of the Sanhedrin. And in his place, they said, who are we going to put in to replace him? Well, we can't put in Rabbi Yehoshua because it's a conflict of interest. He was a party to this. We're not kicking out one person to bring in another person. We want to bring in a neutral party. Well, it really ought to be Rabbi Akiva because he's so brilliant and he's really the one that we're all learning from. No. He's too poor. Whoever does this job has to be wealthy because it also involves interfacing with the Romans, and you have to be sort of a community leader. You've got to be rich, and you have to have some yichus. You have to have ancestry that people are going to respect. So they end up settling on Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Takes this job, and he's very worried about it. He says to his wife, should I take this job or not? Because eventually they're going to reconcile. Rabban Gamliel is going to come back and get the job, and it's going to be humiliating for me. And on the other hand, we need someone to take the lead while he's gone. So because of the stress of this, the story goes that he sprouted gray hair overnight. He was a young guy, but that kind of stress turned his hair gray. So that's why he's about a 70-year-old man, because he looks like one, even though he's a young guy. On the other question you asked about saying the Seder at night, there's actually, and maybe Sarah, you've heard this before, you can help me out. In the Bible, they talk about the Passover Sacrifice, which is supposed to be at sunset. And then they talk about Chag HaMatzot, the holiday of matzah, which is a 7-day deal. And they say you must eat these Passover sacrifice with matzah and maror. That's a positive commandment. And then during Chag HaMatzot, it says, don't eat chametz for 7 days. So there's one theory that says these were originally 2 different holidays. And at some point early on, probably before the time of the Mishnah, they were put together and treated as a single holiday. But there are little strands. If you read Exodus carefully, there's at least one way of reading it to say that there's 2 different holidays. So the holiday of the Passover sacrifice, it says that you're supposed to do that around sunset. And then the holiday of Chag HaMatzot, like all the other Jewish holidays, it starts at sunset and it goes to the next day. So it's an interesting, and that's, I guess you could say that's critical Bible studies, classic biblical study, and certainly these sources that we're reading here would never imagine such a thing because it's kind of heretical.
Well, actually, the Masechet that describes Passover is called Sakim, which is the plural of Pesach. So they very clearly thought, the rabbis thought that it was two different holidays.
I don't know if that's true, because the last chapter of that Mishnah is the Seder, basically.
Yes, right. Yes.
And it's fascinating to read, because if you are familiar with the Haggadah, they used a slightly different Haggadah, starting out with whoever doesn't mention these three things hasn't discharged their obligation: the Passover sacrifice, the matzah, and the maror. And of course, we talk about the memory of the Passover sacrifice, and Rabbi Akiva is already in the days when there are no sacrifices, there's no temple, and he says, no, the Hillel sandwich is what I'm thinking of. Hillel says you should eat the sacrifice with the matzah and the maror, and he's the one who comes up with the sandwich. So later on, we don't have any sacrifice, so I guess we're going to have the matzah and the crane and the lettuce. That's the best we can do to approximate that Passover sacrifice. But we still have the passage about the Passover sacrifice in the Haggadah, which shows you how old it is. It's just tremendous, these traditions that go back so far. So
I think the rabbis also thought the temple would be rebuilt, so they were taking into consideration that the laws would have to reflect someday we'd be sacrificing again.
good point. Very good point. So that's actually a good segue into 5.3 here. If the service leader says, on a bird's nest, may your mercy be extended, or for good, may your name be blessed, or we give thanks, they silence him. What the heck does this mean? So I guess what they're worried about here, anyone you want to guess? Ira, take a guess.
Let's see, is this something like knock on wood? That's my guess.
Okay, any others?
Well, a bird's nest, there's eggs, rebirth or something.
Well, it goes back to the mitzvah of if you are going along and you find the bird's nest and there are eggs and the mother is sitting on the eggs, you send away the mother bird before you take the eggs.
Right, right.
So this is saying, God, you're so merciful, merciful, merciful all the time. Or the second version, the second one is sort of similar. For good, may your name be blessed. Al hatov yizaker shmecha. Well, wait a second. Are we saying that God is always merciful? Maybe we live in a world where, the mother birds do suffer, and this business of the bird's nest, you follow the mitzvahs, great, but doesn't God have mercy when lousy things happen? Or don't we remember God, Al tov yizacher shmecha, for good may your name be blessed? Well, maybe for the bad things also. And modim, it's about a particular kind of idolatry, which is the idea that there's two gods. There's a good God and there's a bad God. Okay, there's God and there's Satan, or whatever you want to call it, Sauron, right? And so what they're saying here is, if somebody uses these phrases, we're going to suspect that they're actually saying modim, modim, we thank the good and we thank the bad. Oof, we're not going to go there. And then these are sort of by implication, we are going to thank God for the good things that happen, which implies that God doesn't really have anything to do with the bad things that happen, that maybe that's God number two, God forbid. So this is kind of interesting, but of course, there's also modim may be sort of having this two gods idea, but what's wrong with saying thank you God for the good things that happened? I find this a very puzzling Mishnah, and I don't think I'm the first one. So what I did here is I took the entire last chapter of Mishnah Berachot, chapter 9. So the whole thing is here, and I'm going to put it a link to this handout in the chat so you can see it. But I'm not going to read every part of it. I just want to put it all here because there might be some useful information here. I guess before I go on, any comments on how I interpreted this this Berachot 5.3, or questions or comments? Yeah, please.
The one for good, may your name be blessed. That reminded me of when you say, you know, somebody's passed on, may their memory be for a blessing. And I don't know how many people in the States watch CNN, but I'm in Canada and I watch CNN all the time. And I don't know if you specifically I think it started with Jake Tapper, Wolf, Blitzer says it, and now some of the other commentators is like when somebody passed away, they'll say, may their memory be for a blessing. I don't know if anybody else has noticed that or just me in Canada.
Totally noticed it. Totally noticed it.
This is so amazing because we're just about to come to the source in the Mishnah for that. Let's jump forward and get to it. Mishnah Berachot 9.2. Okay, we just read, well, we just skipped 9.1. That's okay. So on witnessing comets, earthquakes, thunder, or major storms, one says, blessed be the one whose strength and might fill the world. And when you see mountains, hills, seas, rivers, or deserts, you say, Baruch Oseh Maaseh Reshit. And by the way, if you see this in the Mishnah, Baruch Oseh Maaseh Reshit, what they really mean is Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Oseh Maaseh Reshit. And of course, we have this in our morning services, Oseh, who does the work of creation, meaning it's in the present tense, not in the past tense. So, and we're also talking about the one whose power and might fill the world, even though you could say, well, geological phenomena like this are part of the way the earth was created. I mean, there's always been and there always will be. Maybe there will be more of them, but it's just sort of part of nature. So, but we're nonetheless, when we witness this, we are acknowledging God who created it. So then, in the same Mishnah, this is another paragraph. I paginated it as if it's two paragraphs, but it's the same paragraph. Al HaGshamim, where this is an example of, while we're on the topic of weather, talking about rain, and while we're talking about natural phenomena, when you get rain, which if you're a farmer, rain is life, you're going to die if there's no rain. So when you see rain or good news, sorot tovot, we're going to extend this, not just rain, but any kind of good news. You say, Baruch hatov v'hametiv, blessed is the one who is good and grants good. And for bad news, Val shmuot ra'ot omer Baruch dayan ha'emet, blessed be the true judge. And this is the source of it. This is exactly what you were talking about. So this is an example of you thank God for the good and you thank God for the bad. I don't know if thank is the right word, but you acknowledge that the good and the bad come from God. And you say, Baruch Dayan Emet, in a way to say, we don't understand why the judgment came out this way, but we're going to acknowledge that there's some truth to it. Of course, nowadays we would say, judgment, wait, this isn't, somebody living or dying isn't like a sentence. It's part of the natural world. But in any case, we're going to acknowledge that it's God who is the author of the good and God who's the author of the bad in the sense of bad luck. This is the opposite of the this idolatrous idea that there might be one god that you say thank you for the good, and another one who, you know, maybe in Greek mythology there's Zeus and there's who would it be, Hades or something like that. You have to be thankful to both of them because they're doing good things. Let me pause and see if that gives any ideas that people want to comment on.
There's a famous heresy in Christianity where, you know, one group says that there's a good God and a bad God. I forget the name of the heresy.
Yeah, well, that's great, because again, you're anticipating we're going to this, and there's a place towards the end of the same chapter where they're going to talk about this heresy. And the Sadducees had the idea that maybe there was a good God or a bad God. We'll get to the Sadducees, and maybe when they say the heretics, they're not talking about the Sadducees, they might be talking about the Christians, because this is year 200 or so, and Christianity is kind of taking off. And these are the same rabbis who are very worried about that phenomenon. They're very worried about, and remember that at this time it was Jews who were becoming Christians. So they're worried about these Jews who are choosing to be Christians as opposed to continuing the Pharisee / rabbinic idea of Judaism. Okay, but so we have the good judge, and we have the one who is good and who grants good. Okay, next one. This might be familiar to you also. If he built a new house or bought new vessels, you say, Shehechianu, Baruch Shehechianu. Blessed is the one who kept us alive. And this is, again, the Mishnah is very short. Omer Baruch Shehechianu. We know what they mean, right? It's the full Shehechianu, V'kimanu, V'yanu, Lazman Hazeh. Something happens and you say, I'm so thankful that I've been brought to this point. Then there's this verse, and there's two different interpretations. Mivarech al hara'ah me'ein hatovah ve'al hatovah me'ein hara'ah. And I've translated it according to one interpretation. And the interpretation is, you bless over the bad as you bless over the good, and you bless over the good as you bless over the bad. This is going back to what we've been reading. You understand that God is both the source of good things that happen and the source of bad things. And it's sort of a reflection back on this passage up here that you say, the good one, blessed is God who is good and grants good. Blessed is the true judge who causes these sad things to happen. So that's one interpretation. But another interpretation is that we're about to criticize people who do various things, and this is part of the criticism. You don't bless the bad as you bless the good. They're two different things. Don't get mixed up here. And certainly don't act like there is bad and there's good. One of the interesting thoughts that comes up is, you might say, if bad things happen, that could turn out to be a good thing in the end. You know, one door closes and the other door opens. You got fired from your job, but it leads to your getting a good job. So, well, I got fired, so should I say, blessed is the one who does good things, and so on? No, come on, just say the blessing over the bad things that happen. And the opposite happens too. You found a bunch of money and you say, woohoo, I found some money. And then a minute later you get arrested by the police and say, you stole this money. So something that seems to be good could end up turning out to be bad. And they're saying, bless what's good over the good and bless what's bad over the bad, and don't get mixed up. So this could be saying, one who does these things is doing the wrong thing. That's a worthless prayer. So there's a sense that that you bless God either way, and then there's another sense that says, don't get how would you say this? Don't start getting paranoid because life might go in a different direction. Be thankful for what you get, and don't say, well, it could be some other way. Maybe it could have been some other way in the past, or even, well, this good thing happened, but maybe it's going to be terrible, or the opposite way around. Just, be present in the moment, as you might say. Be mindful and present in the moment. This is one of those that I don't really understand, and maybe you can, any of you can comment on this and give me your thoughts on it, because I can't really say what I think it means. Let me go on to the rest of this paragraph, because that will shine a little light on it, maybe. Hatzoek l'she'avar, somebody who cries out over the past. Harezot filat shav, that is a worthless prayer. And in the rabbi's mind, a worthless prayer is more than just, it doesn't work. It's really wrong. It's taking God's name in vain. If you say, Baruch atah Adonai, over something that you're not supposed to say it for, you just said Adonai in a way that is improper. You wasted it. It's like disrespecting God when you say a blessing that is improper. But you could also say it's worthless. You could just say, what? You think you're going to make a blessing like this and change God's mind? So here they give two examples here. For example, his wife is pregnant, and he says, Yehi ratzon milfanecha, may it be your will, sheteled ishti zachar, that my wife give birth to a male. Okay? Even then they knew that, there are X chromosomes and Y chromosomes, and I don't want to get into gender identity and those kinds of issues. There are X chromosomes and Y chromosomes, and by the time she's pregnant, your praying over it is not going to change anything. There is either a male growing in there or a female growing in there. At birth, let's say, with respect. Second example, if he comes home from a drink and hears a cry of distress in the town, maybe the fire engines are going and you're driving home and you say, oh, let it not be my house that's burning down, let it not be my family who the ambulance is coming. That's not a sensible prayer, because it is or it's not, and you're praying over it. It's not going to change. It's a fact that has already occurred. So this is an example of a worthless prayer. You don't pray to God for something like this. So this is almost intuitive, and it makes sense from what the way we think of the way Judaism thinks of God. You don't pray to God for something where it's already determined. It's already happened in a way. You don't pray to change the past. Sarah, please.
What I love about this is really just this sort of an understanding of what tefillah is. It's not some hocus pocus thing that can make things happen or make things not happen. Maybe you're going to go into this later about the grammar of the word, lahid palel, but that's not what prayer's about.
Yeah, Shoshana.
Well, let's say you get to the house, the house is on fire, you get to the house. If you get to your house, can you say, and see your house hasn't burned down, can you say, thank God my house hasn't burned down? Is that then okay? Because I find this very disturbing. How do you then talk to God when you've been through a tragedy or a hurt or something, and talk to God and said, this horrible thing happened to me, help me explain it, I'm like so upset and stuff like that. I've never come across this, David, and I find it somewhat disturbing.
That's an excellent point. Excellent point. Can anyone answer it? Because I can't. Jerry?
Answer that, but it reminds me of Schroeder's cat. I don't know if you've ever heard of Schroeder's cat, where he Schroeder, the famous physicist, said as a thought experiment, suppose you have a cat that's in a box and you don't know if the cat's alive or dead. And then you do an experiment. And I don't understand it very much. It's one of these real weird mysteries in quantum mechanics. Kind of similar to this in some sense.
Yeah. The thing where you're trying to guess, is the cat alive or is the cat dead? Something like that. Yeah. I mean, I tend to like this, which is that God is not a cosmic pinball machine where you put in the quarter and you say the prayer and then something good pops out. God creates the universe, and God's not going to change the past. And this goes back to, you know, this other one where you say Shefianu if something good happens, or you say Hatov Hametiv, blessed is God, the good one who makes good, and you also say thank God who is the true judge when something terrible happens. But it doesn't answer your question, you know. Erica.
Can I ask a question? Yeah, so it's interesting now that I'm just sort of reading in English, and, you know, the blessed is the true judge. Theoretically, why couldn't you say that for something good? Because it's not necessarily saying it's negative. So I'm just sort of curious, is that why is there, in a sense, a discrepancy? I mean, God does what God does, and, you know, it's not that, of course, we're going to die, but supposedly, I guess, God is deciding when we're going to die, if one believes God that way. So now I'm just kind of interested in why the discrepancy between the two different blessings when one is not really negative.
Fantastic question. Great question. Because maybe if you say God is the true judge, then God is the true judge who says, okay, you're going to live, and okay, you're going to die. If you believe in the theology of, you know, Unatane Tokef, the high holidays, God says your deeds, I'm going to look at your deeds, and if you did good, then you're going to live another year, and if not, you better do repentance or else. I mean, that's a troubling philosophy. I don't know if that I agree with that, but you can't say whatever happens to the world is part of this overall scheme that God created, and we have to be thankful for it. We have to be thankful in that moment for what's happened, right? But then that crashes into this sort of mysterious passage that says, Mevarech al hara'ah me'ein hatova ve'al hatova me'ein hara'ah. You bless the bad in the manner of blessing for the good, and blessing for the good in the manner of blessing of the bad. And as I said, there are two opposite interpretations that people come up.
So I have a question, and is when it says blessed, that to me is not thanking someone. That is a different connotation for me, but maybe that's not how it was back then, and that the meaning of blessed means we are grateful for. But it just means you're accept. To me, it's in this sort of feels like, well, blessed is the true judge. It means, okay, we respect those. That's what's been decided, and that's what's happening for good and for bad, you know.
Yeah, and what is blessed? And you also say the blessing on Friday nights. May God bless you and keep you. Yivarecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. That's a different thing when we say God bless you than when we say Baruch atah, you are blessed. Like, how are we going to bless God if blessing means may God bring blessings on you? Are we bringing blessings on God? I don't think so, but it's the same word, Baruch. So what do we mean? And when you look at the text of the Amidah, the standing prayer, it just uses Baruch, 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 but some of them are asking God for things, and others are thanking God, just thank you. So it means both of these things. That I don't know how it works. And this is why, I'm jumping ahead for a minute, and maybe we'll have time to talk about this more. In my mind, this is why the rabbis were so set on having the world to come, because this is how you solve the problem of unitane tokef, right? If God rewards the good by having good things happen and punishes the bad by having bad things happen, then why did the Romans destroy the temple? You know, okay, there's stories about why they did bad things. It's not like the Holocaust is the first time this happened in the world. These people understand that life is unfair and terrible things happen to good people. So one solution to that problem is to say, well, there's two gods and it's a battle between the good God and the bad God. But the more Jewish solution is, no, there's just one God, and that's why the world to come is one way of answering that, that says, well, there's injustice in the world that we see, but there's a true judge, and there's going to be justice when you add it all up at the end of time. Shoshana.
Yeah, so my thought right now is there a differentiation between these formal blessings that start with Baruch Atah Adonai, etc., and more informal, personal? Because I happen to go to conservative synagogue, and at the end of the Amidah, there's room for personal reflections. So those personal reflections, I suspect, are things that are on my heart, and I might be beseeching God to help me with something or to heal somebody and stuff like that. So is there a differentiation along the way between formal tefillah and more interpersonal tefillah with Hashem?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's a differentiation. I think, now somebody said it at the beginning of this class, maybe you said it at the beginning of the class, that there is this idea that the Amidah evolved into this fixed set of 18 or 19 blessings, and maybe originally it was something more informal. But we've kept that informal thing, you know, one of the things I love about the new conservative prayer book is when the Torah is out, there's a whole page of personal blessings that you can choose from that are none of them is a fixed theme, but of course, since it's hard for most of us to articulate that sort of thing, they've given us a bunch of options, so yes, I think that there's absolutely a place in Judaism for that, for expressing your own feelings and having that be what it's about. But we still haven't solved the problem of are we being mindful and appreciative of the world as it is, or are we wishing for a better world because this world is terrible? Sarah.
Well, the answer to that question is yes. But I was going to say about the Amidah fixedness. I'm a convert to Judaism. It was, I guess, I don't know, 35 years ago, something like that. And for the first 20 years, I would only really do what was like prescribed. And then eventually it became ingrained in me, so much so that I felt, okay, now I can sort of branch out and entertain other ideas. But I was very like, no, I'm going to the traditional service. I'm gonna, I mean, I was never Shomer Shabbat. I do keep a kosher home, but I wasn't crazy is what I mean. But as far as my liturgy went, I only wanted the standard thing. I didn't want to go to a Seder where people were doing all sorts of outbreak things. I wanted the, Haggadah as it was until I learned it. And then after I did, then I was able to say, okay, now I can entertain other ideas.
Yeah, and sometimes the insertions or the little changes have it make you say really what you mean to say, as opposed to the standard text, which is harmful, or not harmful, but just difficult. And on the other hand, sometimes I feel like you learn something by saying these difficult things because, what do we mean when we say, and prayer and repentance and good deeds change the evil decree or transform the evil? I don't know what it means, but I say it because I'm going to learn, or it's going to put me in different directions. because it's hard. This stuff isn't easy. It's really hard.
I have a lot of trouble with the Amidah. I was just talking to someone about this in some other class that I was doing, that I find it's very repetitive, and I find, especially when you have to say it 3 times in a service or twice, if it's the reader's repetition, and the words don't really resonate with me, probably because I don't even know if I really believe in God. So one of the things that, I agree with Sarah in terms of, I like sort of the traditional way, but a lot of times it just doesn't really, the language is also very arcane and archaic and doesn't speak to me. And I like one of the newer prayer books that we use. I'm also in a conservative shul, but it has writings and things in the margins, and they're wonderful. There's poems and I've been doing this for years. Like when Amidah starts, it's like I kind of leaf through and find something else to read that speaks to me and that means something. But I feel then sort of like, well, I'm not really doing the right thing. But the Amidah is hard. I find it challenging. It's probably for more challenging than most other things because of the way it's set up and the language, and and yes, I agree with the High Holy Days, but to me that's a whole other, like, that's this very sacred, special sort of thing. And even if I don't necessarily believe all of it, it's the idea of saying it with everyone, with the congregation, that's very powerful in some way. But yeah, it's so that the Amidah is really, I find, very challenging.
Guess what? You're in luck. We'll talk about this next week, because one of the sources says, well, for women, the Shema is obligatory, not the Amidah. So, what? What? So we'll have some fun with that next time, I think, or maybe we'll break our heads on it. Ira,
As the mother of 3 children, I'm grateful. I mean, they're grown now, but at the time.
So I was moved to get my Siddur. It's the closing prayer just before the end of the Amidah that I think is attributed to Mar, son of Ravinna. In any case, it's where we say, if you say it in English, let's see, and for those who plot evil against me, quickly obliterate their thoughts. I understand that that's traditional. It's really a lovely prayer that I do say myself, but I understand that that's actually the time that we're provided direction to go offline, to speak from your heart.
right.
Precisely. But this is such a lovely prayer, I stick with it typically.
Yeah, and that actually is the official Amidah it was 18, now it's 19 blessings. I'm not talking about the version on Shabbat, but the weekday version. And that little part at the end, the Yehu Leratzon, is an add-on. It's an add-on that's become part of the standard liturgy, but it's sort of like that page in the middle of the red book on reading the Torah that gives you a little thing to say that maybe is better. Look, I like the theology of Debbie Friedman, Misha Berach, may the one who blessed our ancestors give us strength to, if we're not saying heal this person, we're saying give us courage and strength to deal with this difficult situation. I can honestly pray God for that. Yes, Sarah.
I think she says, be a source of healing. Is there a phrase?
Source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing. And then she says healing, but you can be a little bit ambiguous about what that means when you say healing, right? Healing might just be finding the strength to deal with a difficult situation when you are suffering or dealing with a loved one suffering. It's not like put the nickel in the jukebox and expect that because you said it, God is going to bring healing. Sometimes you come into the town and you hear the siren going and you can't sort of pray and say, oh, well, this bad thing that's happening is now a good thing, because the world just doesn't work that way. Even God doesn't work that way. God, this is interesting. This is really interesting stuff. I'm going to wrap because it's 8:15. But I'm going to put in the chat the links to these 2 documents that we looked at tonight, because I have this on Google Drive. I can find it. First, I'm going to stop the screen share. Maybe that will make it easier to find. But yeah, so next week we're gonna do more of this conversation, and then we're also going to look at this wonderful little business that says, well, women's obligations are different from men, and we're going to let the women off the hook. And oh, are you serious? So we'll look at that. So let's see here. Here we go. I'm gonna. Oh gosh, I'm having a hard time with this. Tell you what, I'm gonna rely on Jerry to put this up on our website because I'm just not finding it at this moment. And
I think the link to it was in the email he sent tonight with the Zoom link.
I don't think so.
There was a link to
That link was to what David had screen shared the previous 2 times, but he'll find it. And when I send out the email about the recording, I'll put it in that email.
Oh, okay. So here we go. Here's the one from the link. Yeah, okay, so here is the one from the class that was focused on Keva and Kavanah. Here we go. Chat. Okay, so here's the first one. And now, here's the one that we focused on tonight. Share. Okay. No, I don't want to do that. Do that. Everyone can get this link.
Just put it in the email, the follow-up email. That's might be easier.
We'll put it in the follow-up. I'm sorry to waste your time. Anyway, thank you very much. This has been great, and we'll talk next week.
Thank you, David. And
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have to thank all the instructors. I think I have to thank the whole group because you're all instructors.
Exactly right. Hear, hear.
Thank you, Jerry, for putting my name up in lights.
Right. Right.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
You were right, David. I mean, it's interesting and also it's fun. So that's good.
Yeah, yeah. And
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, I'm going to close this off now.
Okay, great.